Welcome to God and Autobiography, the podcast. I'm your host, Scott Langdon, and I'm thrilled to introduce this latest edition of our series, What's Your Spiritual Story? On this week's episode, Jerry speaks with a Theology Without Walls contributor and dear friend of the podcast, Jonathan Weidenbaum. Jonathan's been with us on the podcast on a few different occasions over the years, giving his expertise as a theology and world religions professor and scholar. But on this occasion, he speaks with Jerry about his personal spiritual story. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I think you will too. I hope you enjoy the episode.
Jonathan Weidenbaum is someone I've known for a while, and so I'm glad to have you volunteer, be drafted to tell your spiritual story. But let's start the story where you started. Where did you grow up, first of all?
Hi. Thank you, Jerry. It's an honor to be here, and I look forward to a great conversation. When I grew up in Long Island, New York, I was born in Queens, but I was brought home to grow up in the suburbs in Suffolk County. And I went to school upstate New York, did a lot of traveling. My dad was commuted his whole career as an NYPD homicide detective in Brownsville, Brooklyn in the 70s and 80s, So,
incredible.
Yeah, that was from our home on Suffolk County. He would go to Brooklyn, and that's where he was a detective. My mom was, sort of just a mother, until we went to college, and then she started working for the state. So my upbringing, there was nothing extraordinary, nothing stand out.
Yeah.
Happy childhood, active and loving parents. And then when I went to my undergraduate, I went to college, then, I discovered I had a passion for certain things, and my whole life since then has been almost lazy in a way. I sort of,
okay.
I never had to kind of search for, what kind of career or what kind of life to make out of it. I just sort of leaned into it. I had my passions, and I saw what I was, I think, good at, and I pursued them, and I didn't stop chasing them. So that's the story.
Where would you think your spiritual story would begin? Was it in childhood, a reaction to something your parents believed, or did those things, spiritual kinds of topics, come to your mind only much later?
That's a great question. And I've been thinking a lot about that, because it was already, even though from my last few years of high school, before I went to college and then pursuing it in college, I discovered an interest. And I think the story is pretty wide held. It's a broadly held story that you gravitate more to Zen Buddhism and Hinduism. And, of course, your knowledge and appreciation of these very rich traditions becomes more mature and subtle as you get older. So it's not like I've ever let those interests go, or I don't want to relegate those interests to simply being young. I mean, a good friend of mine is a practicing Chan Buddhist, and I, as whenever I get money and time off, I travel to South Asia, and I explore Hinduism and Jainism and Sikhism. And I made a career in teaching about world religions, and my knowledge of these traditions gets ever more subtle as the years go on. But also, I always, I 100% have no problem saying that this second part really does come from having a leg in a tradition. I did not grow up in some purely objective plane somewhere. I grew up in a Jewish home. Now my family was not religious, but I remember my dad bringing us to Shul or synagogue, a number of times every year at least, and he instilled in us something of a respect for the tradition, even if we were sort of a semi-secularized middle class, home in a conservative Shul synagogue. It's very much a life in the suburbs and semi-secularized, at least, if not more secular than religious. And I always had an ear and an interest toward this tradition. 100%. I mean, I'd be the first to say, if it was growing up Catholic and attending Mass, if it was going to mosque, and if I was Muslim, if I grew up in Thailand, it would be Theravada Buddhist. So there is something, and I've been thinking a little bit about this lately, the manner in which, and I do want to write about this for Theology Without Walls. I do want to, explore this more, starting where you are, and just like you point out, and radically personal in your work. We don't, we're not sitting in some purely objective neutral plane. We come out of this feeling tones and complexes, and we're already sort of immersed in a world which sort of informs us at very deep levels that even we're not aware of. So already in my last years of high school, I was exploring the works of Martin Buber, the earlier phase of his career, when in particular, when he was kind of a popularizer in the best sense of what that means on Hasidism. And by the time I enter my undergraduate years in college, I'm taking a course in world religions, a course on Indian philosophy. And there's more to say about that as well. That particular course is on Jewish mysticism and Hasidism and the Hasidic story and things like this. And, and I remember, this is a formative story for me. It was early on in my undergraduate years, and I'm reading Martin Buber's I and Thou, and I'm thinking I'm understanding it.
Yes.
So then I'm taking a course with this incredible, this great educator, Rabbi Friedman Cole. I think since this time, he was in Canada for a long time, I think in Toronto at their main synagogue, or one of them anyway. And I remember he was at SUNY Albany teaching a course in Jewish mysticism. And I came to him after, and I start talking about Martin Buber's I-thou relation. And I start talking about it almost as if it's interpreting it wrongly, like the I becomes one with the thou, like in so much contemplative mysticism, that kind of unitary type non-dual religion. And he looked at me and he said, "No, that's what you wanted it to have said. That's what you wanted to say. It doesn't say that." And indeed, if you read I and Thou, book 3 of I and Thou, Buber rejects that kind of unitary sense of the I never becomes one with the thou. The only unity is a unity that overcomes you as you step out into relation, but the I never kind of unifies. The I never disappears into the thou. And Buber rejects that. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. And that kind of launched my interest a little bit into the existentialists. And I had a strong appreciation for Soren Kierkegaard. I still do. That continues to this day. The great 19th century Lutheran theologian and philosopher. And I did my undergraduate thesis on Kierkegaard on the self, the dynamics of the self, and that it's had a huge impact on the other existentialist thinkers, including the more secular ones like Sartre, Heidegger. I went to grad school and I eventually got my PhD in philosophy. So all throughout, I always had an abiding interest in the main ideas and concepts of the main great world religions, East and West, with a particular appreciation for that tradition which I come from. All right, because I already have a leg in it, so to speak. And again, freely admitting, had I been in another tradition, it would be that tradition which would sort of grab me, so to speak. And then and this continues. And this continues. So anyway, you were asking me about origins. I'm sorry I got into student years and
let's back up a little bit.
Sure.
Because
yeah,
you seem to, from as far as I can tell, from your freshman year in college,
yes,
you were already interested in
yes,
the religions of the world and these
absolutely,
ideas and people like Buber and
yes,
whatever.
Right.
And what were you thinking about when you were in junior high or in high school? Or did you have any thoughts about these topics? It just seemed like it came out of nowhere in your freshman year, this interest in all of it, all this.
My last years of high school, I was infatuated with Eastern traditions. And I remember visiting a bookstore with friends, and I walk up to the counter with Shunryu Suzuki's Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And the woman behind the counter, she kind of was a little either dishonest or she didn't understand the material herself. She goes, "Oh, that's a good book for beginners." Of course, it's not for beginners. It's he's a Soto Zen monk. His whole point is that the most advanced mind you can have is always the beginner's mind, that kind of openness, And I, of course, Ram Dass's Be Here Now. I still have it somewhere on my bookshelf.
Yes,
pretty old. When I had purchased it. So, it was my last few years of high school. I got into the Eastern religions. Not at the level that a lot of like scholars of these traditions were interested in them, sort of, but at a basic level, a young basic level. And so I remember, I think it was my first or second year of high school, college, and I was at SUNY Albany. I used to go to a Zendo that was downtown Albany. That was a combination of Soto and Rinzai Buddhism. I would sit Zazen with them. But that's we're getting ahead of you. Still want me to start earlier. Junior high school. I mean, I always had an artistic sensibility. I was the one sitting somewhere in the middle to the back of the class, drawing in the notebook.
Okay. Yes.
And I think there's a connection, Jerry. There's a connection between having an artistic temperament, having a sort of, when you sit and you draw things, you're seeing them as if for the first time. So I was always the one sort of, drawing, and there is something about having a creative temperament, and seeing the world from as many angles as possible. And there was something special about sort of having the possibility. It's almost like you only compare it to having a jacket full of different sunglasses, different colored glasses on you. You could put them on, and you have this gift of being able to look at the world in front of you from many different angles, from many different directions. And that's a powerful thing to have. And that's something I've always kind of carried with me. And I think that very much sort of, there was a natural transition from being a creative person to having a spiritual and religious sensibility.
That's interesting. Yeah. And I know you're a photographer. When in your travels, you bring back the most amazing photographs.
Thank you. That's very, I'm certainly I have no formal training in photography, but I guess I take so many with my phone that some of them turn out okay, and that is true. I once put on a show when I was living in Ridgewood, Queens, and actually at the school, at my full-time institution now, Berkeley College in Midtown Manhattan, I have a little display. It's been up there now for a good 5 years with images from India and Sri Lanka, and some particularly lovely, I think lovely photos from the Golden Temple, the Harmandir Sahib from Amritsar, which is one of the most incredible places I visited in India. But I thank you for that, Jerry, and I do enjoy doing that.
And when you travel, all the travels I've seen reported by you have been to Asia, to India, China, Southeast Asia.
Yes.
And where you're all over the place, but an awful lot is to like Hindu temples and various, places of worship and so on.
Yeah.
And
that's right. I have a particular love of South Asia. In South Asian countries I've been to is Sri Lanka, Nepal, and India. India in particular, I have a love of traveling through because there's so many different regions and parts of it and languages and religions. But it's almost like, and not to sound chauvinist toward other parts of the world, but any other place I travel to is just a little less interesting. There is something interesting. There's something about, and I know you've been to India too, Jerry, the sensory overload of it, the colors, the stimulation of the senses, on top of the fact that, you're in a place now where Kannada is the language versus Urdu versus Hindi versus, Punjabi, and there is like a Sikh Gurdwara there, a tiny little Dargah or Sufi shrine over there, Catholic Church. There's so much. Was it Twain who said that when it comes to many parts of the world, when it comes to religion, so many parts of the world are paupers. India is a millionaire. I'm mutilating his quote. So I'm so.
But India is the millionaire when it comes to religion. There are the two great starting places of religion are ancient Israel, Palestine, and India. Where even the Buddha, who ends up more influential maybe in China, but he starts right there in northern.
I was at his place of birth, which is now Lumbini, Nepal, on the very edge of India and Nepal. And that was already like the year 2000. So it's 26 years ago, but that was, I had to almost carry my friend on my shoulder. He was, had a terrible dehydration at one point, but it was an incredible, Lumbini, Nepal is a really, that was, maybe that incident was a little bit before that. But anyway, Lumbini, Nepal today, I say today, I was at 26 years ago, but it was, you can see the spot where the Buddha was born. It's one of Asoka's pillars, right? A little image of the Buddha standing with his finger, pointing upward. There was different monasteries. One, a Theravada monastery there, a Vajrayana Buddhist or Tibetan Buddhist monastery there, different sects of Mahayana Buddhism there and there, and pilgrims, from all over the world. Of course, it was not crowded at all. Maybe it was the time I was there, but that was I've also been to Bodh Gaya. No, excuse me, I did not go to Bodh Gaya yet. I was in Deer Park or Sarnath, where the Buddha gave his first sermon. It's like, 20 minutes away from Varanasi in India. Bodh Gaya is another time. I'll go another time. I'll visit there another time. But that's part of what makes India very special. A friend of mine just made a video. We were having, three friends of ours, we were having a discussion about the Bhagavad Gita, and we were talking about the Pandavas versus the Kauravas. I know you've read the Mahabharata, Jerry.
Yeah.
And I was talking about when I was doing volunteer work in Uttarakhand in northern India, you had these caves. I don't remember the name of the site, but it's like, according to the local beliefs, that's where the Pandavas hid at one point during the in Mahabharata. And you were able to crawl into the cave, and I didn't crawl too far in, but so no, India is really, it has that quality. It's extremely special in that regard, and that's how a lot of people feel throughout parts of the Middle East as well. And I did similarly when I was in China. I visited all the Chan that's as the immediate Chinese ancestor to Zen, the temples I could, the Dogen Temple, the Linji Temple. There is, and I visited Confucius's grave when this is back in 2011. So there is something, I have a soft spot toward these regions of the world that are long history, and yet these cultures are still alive, like all cultures transform over time, they still carry this past with them. There's some continuity even through the change. And one day, Jerry, when the politics changes, I will make my way to Iran.
Okay.
Yes. I'd love to see Persia. That's very high on my list. Let's hope things don't get too bad.
Get worse. Get blown up. The great old ancient Zoroastrian sites still there.
Yeah,
from Cyrus the Great and so on.
Right.
But but I gather you've been fascinated by all these Eastern religions and the richness and almost spectacle of it, the kaleidoscopic spectacle.
Right.
Have you ever thought, I'm a Taoist, or I'm committing myself to Zen Buddhism? Or
that is a very good question. And the answer is no. I was never tempted to, let's say, take refuge, as the Buddhists say, in the three jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. I was never, or become a practitioner of a sect of Hinduism, or become a Ruist or Confucianist. I always understood myself as a non-practicing, now I'm a little bit more practicing, we'll get to that, but a non-practicing Jewish man who is simply exploring the world's religions, drawing insights from them, of course, but always as a member of a certain people and a certain group with a religious heritage all our own. And it's interesting. It's like that interplay between going elsewhere and coming home, and the way and it's like I never had a dramatic moment where, okay, now I'm returning. Well, actually, I kind of have, in a way, as I've returned to Shul, or I started attending regularly now, very regularly. But I always was aware, I'm visiting with reverence these rich traditions. I remember when I was in in the Punjab region of India around Amritsar. I hired a sort of a little tuk-tuks, and we went to all the Sikh places of pilgrimage, not all around Amritsar, not simply the great Golden Temple within it. But I was always, while appreciative of the richness of other civilizations and cultures and their religions, always understood that I too am a member of one. And it's important to appreciate that. And, and I knew that one day I would sort of, let's say, ground myself a little further within it.
Let me ask you another question.
Sure.
About one of the things the religions have, of course, is not just art and belief systems and philosophies, you might say, but they have spiritual disciplines.
Yes.
Many people these days meditate just for relaxation.
Right.
Do you practice, or have you practiced, the spiritual disciplines of any of these traditions?
That is an absolutely fantastic question. Thank you for asking that, Jerry. There was a stretch of time when I was an undergraduate, maybe it lasted for maybe a few years, where it began with me attending the local Zendo, which was, I remember it was in downtown Albany. I had mentioned it a little earlier. And they were like a bunch of the mountain and river orders. They were affiliated with a major Zen Buddhist temple, I believe, somewhere in the Catskills. I could be wrong. But anyway, it was someone's home, and they were practitioners of Zen Buddhism, and they cultivated a zendo in their home, and I would go early every morning to sit zazen with them. And then I purchased the Seiza bench, and of course, it's very, very extremely formal. I remember to this day, the zendo, those bare wooden floors. China or Zen has almost a kind of what's the word I want to use? A religion. Let's just say it's extremely minimalist in its aesthetic, and sort of and you would have these the blue mats, and you bow to the Buddha image at the end of the room. You'd bow to your fellow practitioners or meditators, and for about a half hour. And I believe in Rinzai Zen Buddhism, you're facing each other as you sit zazen. And for Soto, you're facing the wall. So as symbolic that it was both sects, that we would do both. I'm sorry, I'm getting to a little bit of detail here. But so I remember for a good year, I would sit zazen on a regular basis. And then I continued that. Even when I was no longer attending the Zendo. And, it's extremely, it has, and from after that period of time, the only time I ever sit zazen is when I'm in front of a class in my world religions class with the Zen Buddhism section. And even that I've not been doing as much in recent years. But there was this period of time I was sitting zazen on a regular basis, and it was tremendously influential on me. I mean, even to this day, when I'm nervous about something, or I'm getting lost in what Buddha sees as your monkey mind, you're sort of your turbulence of your thoughts, and you're carried away somewhere, or you're not present enough. I just notice if I straighten up even if I'm standing on the subway or sitting on the subway, or, I straighten up my spine, my neck, I remember all the formal sort of, the posture of sitting zazen, and I put my hands in the cosmic mudra, and I take one deep breath, but then concentrate on my breaths, and it has an immediate grounding effect on you. Your mind, the turbulence of your thoughts, they don't bother you, and they begin to still themselves a little bit, and because you're grounded elsewhere on your hara, your center. It's kind of coming back to me now as I talk to you, but so yeah, that was extremely the importance of that. Now, I've never done other things. I've never done, let's say, yoga, hatha yoga. I have never done tai chi. I've never done those traditions. This was strictly the one. Again, I never took refuge. I never became a Zen Buddhist, let's say. Now, every morning, I don't know if there's it's interesting to ask oneself if this is a discipline in the same way that Zazen is. There's all kinds of rich comparisons a person can draw. It's funny because I'm looking at this pile of books across from my bed. I got one's on Zen and Hasidism, But every morning I lay Tefillin, and you know what Tefillin is. Christians in the New Testament know it as phylacteries. It's those sort of the parchment with writing, basically with writing from the Torah in it on the black box you put on your arm and one on your head, and you're unifying, I say intellect, but also kind of intuition, head, arm, and heart together before God. And, you do that every morning. And Judaism prescribes that you have kavana or intention as you do it, but even to do it is enough,
Right.
And there is something very grounding about that. And there is something of a discipline in that. But it's much briefer, at least for me, during most week mornings. But anyway, so things like that, that's kind of what I do now. And otherwise attending shul. But otherwise, in terms of the kinds of disciplines you're talking about, I have not cultivated the sitting zazen or anything else.
Yeah. And I gather you never then, because you never tried to become Zen or Tao
Yes.
or something,
Yeah.
you didn't go through a moment of rejecting it,
No.
of thinking, oh, no, that's not the way to go. It's superficial or who knows what.
Right. No, in fact, if anything, I am proud to say and happy to say that as the years go on, I keep not only do I immerse myself deeper within Judaism, but with my own heritage, which I've never left, even though I was never. I used to say, that not that I used to say that I'm sort of a secular Jew, but it's that secular is not rejection. It's more of sort of just I'm being lazy. I have to immerse But when it comes to the other religious traditions, and I've said it over the years, the opposite. I continue to read and learn about them, and you gain new layers of knowledge and appreciation for them. They're not to be treated simply as sort of way stations on our own development, or something we appreciate in our youth, because they have depth and relevance and richness. And one thing I've appreciated over the years is the sheer pluralism within the Hindu religion.
Yeah.
Different theologians that say different things with each other. So just quickly, I mentioned a course I took as an undergraduate called Indian Philosophy, and I took literally 2 classes with the same title. Now, why is it significant? The Indian philosophy class I took when I was an undergraduate at SUNY Albany, it was basically the spiritual religious traditions. We explored the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, the Veda. We looked at sort of the other religions of South Asia, Sikhism, Jainism. We used John Kohler's book, The Indian Way. It was the religious traditions, really. And then when I studied abroad in Singapore, I had Chakrabarti Ram Prasad, who is a major, major scholar, and he's gotten bigger, blown up since so many years ago when I had him when I was an undergraduate. And I took this course of the same title, Indian Philosophy. And what was it? It was no joke Indian philosophy. You'd think you were exploring the analytical rigor of a Bertrand Russell or of Willard Van Orman Quine, but in a South Asian context. We're talking about figures like Buddhist philosophy, like Danaga. We're talking about, the different schools of thought in South Asian philosophy that were extremely analytical, fine-grained linguistic and conceptual distinctions, logical arguments, and it was extremely eye-opening to see the sheer range and depth of these traditions, and and their pluralism and how they take on so many different kinds of forms, from the analytically rigorous to the intuitive and I don't know what's a good word, unitary or mystical or what have you, and everything in between. So,
Yeah.
So to summarize, while I at no point did I ever join or sort of embrace the actual practice of one of these traditions. I mean, I guess I used to sit zazen with Zen Buddhists, but I never thought of myself as a member of them. But neither do I treat them or see them as sort of a stage to outgrow. They're not. My appreciation for their richness continues, and I want to continue growing and learning more about them.
So for you, they continue to be sources of insight.
Of course.
in your own development, in your own spiritual, intellectual development.
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, it's my sense from having known you for a while, Jonathan, that as you've been going off to Asia and bringing back great photographs and stories
Yeah.
also, and insights,
Right.
At the same time, you always seemed rather knowledgeable about the Jewish tradition,
Right.
though you weren't, I don't know, have you visited Israel?
I have. I lived on a kibbutz. I visited Israel in 2000. I think maybe from the end of 2000, for 5 months, I lived on a kibbutz from 2003 to 2004. And in that 5-month period, I went to Jerusalem at least 3 times. I've been to the mystical city of Tzfat in the Galilee. Yes, I did visit Israel, and I took a kind of learning Hebrew course there in the kibbutz, but I spent the time drinking vodka and smoking the nargila, so that didn't. I didn't.
Okay. I don't know how these people managed to revive the ancient Hebrew language and use it for everyday conversation.
Sure.
And not even the same alphabet that we're familiar with,
right?
Like learning another Indo-European language.
Right, but of course, colloquial Hebrew really, learning to order a hamburger in Tel Aviv. I mean, the colloquial Hebrew does not interest me as much, But certainly, I love the Hebrew of the Siddur, the prayer book, and I love it when I hear other Jewish languages like Yiddish and Ladino, and But certainly, so I did have that experience. But I wouldn't say, what. It's just maybe I do have a deep appreciation for some of the philosophers and theologians within the Jewish tradition, but also the general practice of it. Of course, Judaism is practice. I think it's safe to say that Judaism doesn't. I don't think the theologians and philosophers of Judaism play even remotely as important a role in Judaism as they do within Christianity and Islam. I think Judaism is practice. I like to say this. I like to tell this story. It's not even a real story. I like to tell this. This kind of. When I'm in front of my class, in my world religions class, I'm talking about Judaism. I'm talking about how difficult it is for me to define it, even though I come from this heritage, right? And in fact, indeed, I am a Jew. So in the 12th century, I believe in the 12th century, Maimonides came up with the 13 principles of the faith. All right, I hope I got the century right. But if I were to get in front of a board full of rabbis, and by the way, this is in front of a room when I have lots of Christians and Muslims. So as you know, in Islam, the Shahada, there's no God but Allah, Muhammad is his prophet, is so core for most Christians, the Nicene Creed and things like the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus. And, so these are creedal religions. This is what they're used to, So I'm getting in front of the room. I'm explaining, Maimonides in the 12th century came up with this 13 articles of belief. If I were to get in front of a stadium full of rabbis and go through each of them saying, no, I don't agree with that. Not for me. No, thank you. The rabbis would yawn. And, okay, what was your mother? Just tell me what your mother. And when, she's obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, but she's Jewish. And so, okay, then you are. And then, even then, they would not stress so much, believe this or believe that. They would say, do this or do that. In the morning, or the daylight, put on Tefillin, be Shomer Shabbos as much as you can, follow the laws of Kashrut, carry out the Mitzvot, the commandments. So Judaism, there's definitely a stress. I think it's safe to say the stress on doing and not so much on holding an abstraction. In fact, I'm reading this wonderful, I always revisit one of my great heroes, Martin Buber, two types of faith. And he's contrasting Judaism, he's contrasting sort of how faith is understood within a Jewish context, of which he sees Jesus as his great brother. He includes Jesus.
Uh-huh.
Buber is one of those that has a very, very important place for Jesus in Jewish history, versus when you see within the New Testament, while Jesus somehow embodies the Jewish notion of faith as Emunah, which is kind of like a directness of the whole person, if you will, toward the divine, and through others, of course, into the world and what have you. But, in the New Testament, already with Paul, there you have somehow faith becoming an item of belief, like a point of cognition that the individual has to accede to. And of course, his tone is not disparaging, but maybe he's got a preference for Emunah over that. But the point is, though, that there is that tendency within Judaism that it does not emphasize so much the acceptance of an item of belief, even though Jews do have beliefs, as much as sort of the carrying out of the mitzvot. Of course, I'm using Buber as an example, but Buber rejected halakha. So, that was one point of dispute between him and Franz Rosenzweig. Franz Rosenzweig argued for the centrality of halakha, Jewish law, and carrying out the mitzvot. And I don't think Buber gave it the same centrality. But yeah, no, I do have a deep, deep appreciation for, as you know, the talk I delivered when we were in Boston was it was in Hasidism, and I have a particular love for that chapter in the Jewish mystical tradition, among other topics in Judaism.
Yeah. Now, I've heard it said, maybe the rabbis say it to their flock, their congregants, just do it.
Yeah.
And afterwards, you'll understand it.
Yeah.
And why it matters.
I'm following that, actually.
Is that right? Is that what you're doing?
Yeah, it is. I mean, there are some similarities between the conservative shul I grew up in and the now Orthodox shul that I attend.
Oh, you attend Orthodox?
Yes, yeah.
Wow.
I found a shul that's important to find it's walking distance, So
Yeah.
beginning Friday night, I walk there, and I walk home after when Shabbos has begun, and I also go there Saturday mornings for chakras, and I get called up to the Torah because I'm a Levi. I'm Zelig ben Peretz Halevi, I'm a Levite, and then for Mincha and Mariv, the evening service on Saturday, then I return again for Sunday morning, which is an ordinary weekday. But yeah, so like most weeks, 4 times a week, usually on the weekend over Shabbos in particular. So Orthodox, and so it does bring up some memories of the conservative shul I went to, but it's more. There's a little differences too.
Well, we were talking about just do it, and then you'll understand.
Yes.
And the Orthodox do more than anybody. As I understand it.
But I love that phrase because part of, and by the way, I advocate this not only for those that come from a Jewish heritage, but if I'd be the same way for me if I was Catholic and I was returning to church for the weekly for a mass, or if I was going to mosque, and if I was a Muslim. There is something about grounding yourself in a living tradition that has all these layers to it, and it is 100% okay if you don't understand all those layers yet.
Mm-hmm.
And just doing it, just wrapping the tefillin, just standing when you're supposed to stand for the Amidah or the Shemona Esrei prayer, just do it. And it adds, and it's true that I'm also reading books about it too. So it gives me knowledge about it. But just in the doing it, getting involved, adopting the rhythms of it, acclimating yourself to the rhythms of the service, to the way the particular religion you practice structures your week, to the way in which, now I wake up, the first thing I do in the morning is I say the Moda Ani. It's the prayer you say in the morning. You thank God for restoring your soul to you, and there is something just doing all of it. The meaning of that's a bit more obvious, but it's sort of, how should I put this? You discover that you're walking through a body of water that gets a little obscure, gets darker when you look down, but it has a lot of richness to it, kind of mixing metaphors. But
Metaphors.
yeah, but it's sort of it definitely it adds a level of depth to your life, and it begins to inform you more and more and more as you go through it more. And they're there for a reason. These the great world religions, in that sense, that the way in which they reshape you when you actually practice them, and the cerebral understanding can come a little bit later. It's the feeling tones of it, the rhythms of it. Adopt that, and then the ideas all the more richly will come.
And when I first knew you, I don't think you were particularly observant, maybe
No.
high holy days or something.
No.
But what brought about that change?
That is a great question, Jerry.
I mean, that's not that long ago. I've known you for less than the 20 years you're alluding to, I think.
Yeah, 15 years. I think we known each other, or maybe a little more than 15 years, probably. But well, see, the Models of God came out 2013.
Well, that was our first encounter.
Yes.
When that was about to come out.
Right. So I would say that there are a number. So I just passed the year mark of attending this Orthodox shul. It's been 1 year, just
1 year,
and less than that for wrapping tefillin. Now, I need to confess I'm not 100% from or practicing, but I do want to gravitate more and more in that direction. And of course, some people at the shul know that I'm not 100%, and that's they're okay. They say we'll work on you. We'll get there. But anyway, so to answer your question, I've been thinking about how to explain this all the way working up to this conversation. There are a number of interlocking reasons why I attend the shul, why I have decided to get more involved. One of them, this was always about to happen. It's not so much a brand new development as something that was deferred. The tefillin that I put on, I first bought in 2003, but I went into a shoebox, just close to the time I was getting, a job, a real job, and eventually moving to the city, and then actually probably 2003, 2004, I purchased it, and then it came out. So it was always just around the corner. It was always just ahead that I was about to attend. Now, something finally brought me to start attending. And it's funny because, Jerry, I make a career in explaining ideas. That's what I do. I get in front of classrooms full of students, and I talk about world religions, and I talk about subtle concepts, the Buddhist notion of the sunyata, the void. I talk about, the Sufi practice of dhikr, all these things but the main reason that brought me, I have a hard time understanding, let alone explaining. So let me just try. And I'm doing this as much for myself as I am for you. When this moment we're living in, post October 7, deep into this, the social and political fallout of the.
You're talking about the attacks on people, these kind of slaughters of people in Israel by Hamas.
And now all the violence, the violence in the Gaza, all these things that have occurred.
Yeah.
I'm not saying anything about who's right or wrong. I'm not getting into the politics. I'm not getting into, Jews are very divided about it themselves, and the public is very divided about it. And I'm not even saying who's right. I'm not involved in that at the moment. That's a whole separate conversation. But I'm on X. May God forgive me. I spend too much time. X is formerly known as Twitter, and you see the social political fallout of it. You also see it on the streets. You see it in academia and elsewhere, and it's extremely. And some of it gets very, very, very ugly.
Yes.
Yes, there is a rise. I'm not conflating criticisms of Israel with anti-Jewish hatred, although there's a strong overlap, but they're not the same, of course. But there is a kind of a return to like Father Coughlin years of, of anti-Jewish bigoted rhetoric. The intensity of it is through the roof. Someone that goes on someone as mainstream as Piers Morgan and, says the biggest problem in the world today is Jewish supremacy. I mean, this kind of thing,
Yeah.
So it's flooded into even to the mainstream discourse, and so, and here is what brings me to the limits of what I can explain. Somehow, not running away from the heritage or the tradition, but leaning in and embracing the religious core, which in my opinion is the core of Jewish existence. So in that regard, I agree with some Jewish philosophers and theologians that, and it doesn't, of course, there's many ways to conceive of God. There are many ways to conceive of what the tradition's all about. The practice of the Torah, the Mitzvot, the covenant. There's many interpretations of this, and we can debate about this till the cows come home, whatever. But there is something about reconnecting, grounding yourself into the religious core that is the deepest kernel, if you will, of Jewish existence that somehow gives me a sense of strength, stability. It's like I'm going to use an analogy that's a million times. It's almost cliche, probably, but sort of a plant that's unmoored from the soil is subject to the winds. But if you ground it into the soil, not only does it have a basis, but it also the nutrients from the soil comes up and floods it. So some reasons I can't fully understand, let alone explain, grounding yourself into the spiritual core, the religious tradition, enables one to deal with the ugliness of the time in a very profound kind of way. It makes you almost immune in a sense. I mean, maybe immune is too strong a word. Maybe it's not the right word, but it sort of, it helps you withstand it, and all, on top of the fact that it gives you your whole life so many levels of richness it didn't have before. You may notice some pauses in my inability to fully, I'm not very fluid at the moment in explaining all this because some of it I can't explain. Mention, but that's about as good an. So that's the main. That's one of the core reasons why I have decided within the last year to return to practice to an extent. I'm not fully practicing, but to go to Shul and start rapping Tefillin and all these things. Whereas I was kind of living a fully secular life in the years leading up to that for a long time. And that's my answer. About as good as I can do. I hope that's sufficient.
Is there a current trajectory that you would see? I know one cannot foresee one's future.
Yeah.
But is there a current sense of directionality in your spiritual development?
Well, thank you. It's a good question. And I suppose I want to, from what I see now, I think it was another Jew of the past who played a kind of formative role in creating another religion who said, for now we see through a glass darkly. Of course, that has to do with seeing the divine. But in terms of seeing my own future, what I'm guessing is that I'm continuing along the road I'm on now. Gradual deepening of my relationship to the tradition that I come from, while studying and learning about other religions as well, or continuing to, as a theologian without walls, as a philosopher of religion, among other things. So part of that is something I've already been pursuing now for many decades, but the other part of it, grounding myself in the tradition, is rather newer for me. But just continuing along these lines. That is the only thing I can say at the moment. If something radical happens, we'll see. But that's what I foresee. I'm pointed and I'm moving, and I've been pointing there for a while, and I'll continue in that direction.
Do you pray?
I do. I do. I pray first thing when I wake up. I say the Moda Ani.
Mm-hmm.
I wrap Tefillin, usually some point in the morning, which is you pray when you do that, the Shema, among other things. I go to Shul 4 times a week. Now, I think you might be asking in a less formal way. There are moments when I do, but now we're going to get
A
to
kind of personal prayer, not an
yeah.
official prayer.
Now,
That's my Baptist background,
right,
coming to the
right.
fore. There's that way of praying also.
Yes,
Lord, help me out.
or spontaneous one,
Yeah.
So I would think. By the way, I want you to know that there in Judaism, there's a sort of there was an actual practice. I believe that this was exemplified by Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav. He's one of the great Hasidic masters, where he would advocate that every Jewish person, at some point, probably each day, should go somewhere, an open field, behind a building somewhere, in your room, whatever, and just sort of communicate to God, even your most creaturely needs,
Yes.
almost like a person to their jilted lover,
Yes.
the outpouring of the heart. So this is very much a personal kind of relational kind of thing, not immersing oneself in some cosmic ground, but rather a kind of almost sort of heart in the sense of, like a person to their lover or just sort of. And so here's the deal. I mean, people think of the divine in many ways. When I was much younger, for many years, for me, the only way I could make sense out of God was thinking about God in terms of an ultimate reality, right? Kind of this a Spinozistic oneness, or I don't know if that was his particular way of putting it. Probably wasn't, but that something out of the Advaita Vedanta, something like more of an absolute or an ultimate reality that was not, let's say, it could be transpersonal, love itself, but it didn't love you as opposed to you. It was a non-personal ultimate. In the years since, I've had various ways of modifying that picture, and I do find something in me that does resonate to what Abraham Joshua Heschel calls the divine pathos. The God who cares about the outcome of history, who speaks to the mouths of prophets, and sort of something of a sort of a personality to the divine that cares about history and its outcome, and I resonate to that, but I have no personal experience of it. Right. So I have never heard a voice back, let's say.
Right.
So while I have absolutely zero religious experience of a deity that is any way of a personal deity, let's say theism, there is still something in me that does, as I mentioned, resonate toward that kind of picture of the divine, in addition to the more transpersonal or picture of the divine as an ultimate reality. So where am I going with all this? You asked me if I pray. I do find myself doing praying at various points. I suppose one of the prayers I do is I ask for some help so I can actually truly believe in a personal deity, right? That's a bit of a struggle. We'll see where that takes me.
Yeah.
I definitely, I find a very important place, certainly in Judaism, but even across many religions, for both, for appreciating the non-personal depictions of an ultimate reality, but also a more personal picture of a theistic entity like deity. So
let me ask you another question. I didn't mean to cut you off, but
not at all.
Have you personally had an experience of the transpersonal aspect of the divine reality?
So, the answer would be no. So I haven't had of that either. The closest I have to anything that can be considered a religious type experience is one that artists have too, and I think the Buddhists call it tathata or suchness. And you describe it vividly and beautifully and radically personal, of looking at that drop of water collecting on the end of the garden hose knob, or the garden hose,
Yeah.
sort of that kind of, I think the Zen and Taoist painters of East Asia capture with their landscape paintings, that sort of the way in this sort of astonishment before the way in which effervescent character of nature sort of speaks of the divine in that sense, that kind of that astonishment before being. But I would say it's through that I come close to something. I mean, when you say transpersonal, like I think of Satchitananda and Advaita Vedanta, something that's bliss consciousness awareness, that's the ground of all things. In that regard, no. But definitely that sense of the ineffable. So I would say another theologian and philosopher that captures this is Abraham Joshua Heschel. Now, Heschel, as I already mentioned, he does accept the divine pathos, a personal creator God. But a lot of his writings sort of move in the direction of understanding that, but they begin with awe, wonder. They begin with astonishment, and so that's about as close as but an atheist with an artistic bent can have this kind of experience. I mentioned Buddhism, a non-theistic religious tradition. So in terms of the panoply of religious experiences, the one in which that I can affirm is that sense of that wonder before being. I have had it many times, but I have had neither correspondence with a personal element of the divine, nor sort of sense of cosmic unity with the one or what have you, But this can also be, but I'm also realizing that enough human beings have given testimony to both of those, that
Yes.
there's something, including yourself,
Yes.
that there's something to take seriously about it.
Mm-hmm.
And that it also maybe depends upon my own stage and level of development. Maybe I have these walls that I have to break through in my own psyche. Maybe I have something in me that doesn't believe enough and needs to believe more. Maybe, I don't know. It could be. Yeah.
I just tell you my take. I'm opinionating,
Yeah.
but my sense of it, Jonathan,
Yeah.
is that's just one of the ways the divine shows itself.
Yeah.
Is in that aesthetic appreciation, that
Yeah.
awe before nature. Nature is awesome. The world is awesome. The fact that there's something rather than nothing is
Right.
awesome.
Yeah.
And if one just takes that in,
Yeah.
you're there. It's
Yes.
not as though there's some other thing. No, you've got to merge with the one, or no, you've got to hear a voice the way I do.
Right.
No. There are many ways the divine comes. Some of them are alluded to just
right
in passing in my conversations with God.
Yeah.
But and then rest there. Don't worry about nobody has nobody's in a position to I don't know, set what the standards have to be.
Yeah.
No, it's sufficient for you and the ultimate, whatever one wants to call it.
Yeah.
I call it the divine reality, thinking that sounds that's a little broader than a pure theistic approach, but then you're there. That's my view, and you just what you do is become you completely I don't know, you hoe your own row. You kind of become deeper. You're using that metaphor of having roots and so on to ground you. Well, you just sink those roots deeper and take in more nutritions, more types of soil and so forth. And that's all you need to do. And that process probably will never end for you, Jonathan. That would be my guess. Does that sound reasonable to you?
It sounds more than reasonable. It sounds very, very wise. You must have written radically personal, because I see those themes. I see a lot of those themes in that book. I hear oh, wait a minute, I think you are the author. No, it sounds actually, that sounds extremely wise, and I have nothing to complain about.
Yeah.
I have nothing to complain about. I don't complain that I haven't had this religious experience or this one, because I don't even think it's about pursuing religious experience, but I do have is deep, deep gratitude to live in such a rich world, even with its problems, to come from a lovely and amazing tradition that offers itself to me that I can ground myself in further, to be in a world with other such traditions that I can drink from and learn more and more about. That I do have. To that I say a gigantic resounding amen.
I will say amen too. That was the very phrase coming to my mind, was amen.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. This has been a wonderful conversation. And
thank you, Jerry, for having me. And it's a pleasure to talk to you as usual.
It's always great to see you.
Thank you for listening to God and Autobiography, the podcast. Subscribe for free today wherever you listen to your podcasts and hear a new episode every week. You can hear the complete dramatic adaptation of God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher by Jerry L. Martin by beginning with episode 1 of our podcast and listening through its conclusion with episode 44. You can read the original true story in the book from which this podcast is adapted, God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher, available now at Amazon.com and always at godandautobiography.com. Pick up your own copy today. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, please email us at questions@godandautobiography.com and experience the world from God's perspective, as it was told to a philosopher. This is Scott Langdon. I'll see you next time.